To chase away the crows in the cornfield, the farmer brought in a scary scarecrow. Unexpectedly, the next morning, he found that the cornfield was full of crows' corpses, and what was even stranger was that anyone who came into contact with it would die strangely. Not only that, the victim's belongings would be scattered around the scarecrow. At first the farmer thought it was luck that God had bestowed upon him, but then bad things happened one after another on the farm. The farmer's pleasure turned from being to fear, and no matter how he destroyed it, when he left, the scarecrow would reappear in the cornfield the next day. John is the owner of this farm, and he recently got into trouble with his own cornfield due to drought, which disrupted his field's harvest season, and which made him even angrier. Because every corn harvest, the crows are constantly gnawing on his cornfields. In desperation, John had no choice but to come to the barn, ready to pick up the scythe, but because he was too angry, he pulled the baffle that hung the scythe, but unexpectedly found a secret passage behind the baffle. When John opened it, there were some strange symbols and something wrapped in a sack. When John opened it, it turned out to be a scarecrow with a very strange face. As a farmer here, John had never seen this scarecrow and didn't think much of it. John would tie the scarecrow to the cornfield to keep the crows away. At this time, his son suddenly came, and seeing this horrible scarecrow, the son begged John to get rid of it. But John thought it was just an ordinary scarecrow, and there was no need to overact. When John was in the warehouse, John was also very surprised that the corn he had just brought home from the field had been devoured by crows, and there was nothing John could do about it. At this time, John's neighbor Jude came to visit. John told Jude about the current difficulties, and Jude also had the same experience. When the two were discussing the solution, the scarecrow placed in the warehouse suddenly caught Jude's attention and suggested that John use it. So John went after hearing Jude's suggestion and set up the scarecrow in the middle of the cornfield. The next morning, when John opened the door to greet the morning sun, there were many dead crows all over the field, which made John very happy too. John saw that it was a scarecrow to keep the crows away, but it was actually a scary cursed scarecrow. On this day, the bank manager came here to urge John to pay off the debt. It turns out that John borrowed a large amount of money from the bank. If John can't repay it on time, the bank will force his farm to be auctioned off. John asked to wait for the corn harvest, so the bank manager could only leave here first. But at night, the bank manager secretly went to John's farm and put up a foreclosure sign by the farm road. The bank manager then had to go to the cornfield to relieve himself, and heard voices around him. The already dark cornfield became even more frightening. The manager instantly became alert. Looking around, John suddenly heard the sound getting closer and closer, and when John ran into the road, a big truck happened to pass by and hit him. The next morning, the police had just arrived at John's farm and told John the bank manager died as a result of being run over, as they had just had a meeting yesterday, and there was an argument between them. John explained that he didn't go out last night because he was with his wife. The police then left after finishing their questioning. Then John went to the cornfield to check on the corn growth, but John found that a large amount of cash appeared in the cornfield mysteriously. While he was picking up the cash in the field, he also found a watch that belonged to the bank manager. Jude comes to visit John, and John tells Jude that John just got the watch and the cash, but Jude didn't take it seriously, thinking that it must be God's favor to John, and asks John to keep it. So John came to the small town, using the money to buy fertilizer, and threw it all into the cornfield. John finished taking care of the cornfield until the evening. When John got home, John suddenly found that his wife was chatting with her ex-boyfriend. The two were acting intimate, which made John very uncomfortable, but his wife said that she loved John very much. This calmed his angry heart. Then John lay down on a chair, while eating corn and drinking beer, but John was surprised to find a tooth in the corn. Then he saw his son standing near the cornfield. Then his son went into the cornfield, and John was afraid that something would happen to John's son. When John hugged his son, John found the straw on his son's body full of red blood. Soon after, his son disappeared, and when John looked up, John found himself nailed like a scarecrow, and both screamed simultaneously. But it turned out that it was all just John's nightmare. Today, John and his wife were surprised to find that his cornfield had grown overnight. John also found a ring on the cornstalk, and John thought all this was a gift from God. John didn't think much of it. When John returned home, John heard the news of the death of John's wife's ex-boyfriend. While his wife was sad, she accidentally found on John's finger a ring that belongs, so his wife thought John might be involved in this case. But John explained that this ring was taken in the cornfield, and the two strange deaths that happened one after another also scared John. He thought it was all the scarecrow's doing, because nothing happened before the scarecrow was established. John then tried to remove it from the cornfield and set it on fire. But the next morning, John saw the Scarecrow reappear. In the panic of this moment in the cornfield, John meets Jude. Jude asks his wife to give him an ancient book that has been hidden for a long time. This ancient book records everything about the Scarecrow. It turns out that this Scarecrow was made with witchcraft. As long as the farmer puts it in the field, it will help the farmer solve all his problems, and John has used it to get rid of all the crows in the cornfield, and let the two who were bothering him die immediately. This was all the Scarecrow's doing, and John also felt very scared after learning the truth. After thinking about it, John just returned home and met the police who came to check. John wanted to tell the policeman about the Scarecrow even though it sounded crazy. When John went to the warehouse, John opened the mysterious passage of the warehouse, but was shocked to see Jude's presence, and the policeman was knocked unconscious. It turns out that Jude always knew about the Scarecrow's evil deeds. It was Jude's conspiracy to encourage John to set up the Scarecrow in the cornfield. Because of the appearance of the Scarecrow, and Jude's field could also be protected. John's wife had just gotten home and came to the barn, but she found John talking to himself. John turned around and saw that Jude had disappeared, and John tried his best to explain to his wife about the Scarecrow's deeds. But at that moment his wife suddenly saw a policeman lying on the ground. She immediately lost faith in John and thought that John was really a murderer. So she hurriedly escaped from the barn and took her daughter and son to escape the farm, and John also chased after her. They had no choice but to run into the cornfield. They walked in the cornfield. Before long, her son left and got separated from her. When John arrived at the cornfield, John was surprised to find that Jude and his wife were dead. And John's son went to the barn, and when he stopped, the barn door was mysteriously closed, and heard a strange noise behind it. John's son ran to the attic to hide. The Scarecrow attacked using a scythe. Soon the policeman wakes up from his coma, climbing the ladder to protect the boy, but is suddenly captured by the Scarecrow below. Seeing the Scarecrow stabbing the policeman, John's son screamed loudly, and his screams were heard by John. So they rushed to the barn quickly, and John fought one-on-one with the Scarecrow to protect John's family. But the Scarecrow throws John unconscious, and when his wife and daughter come, they don't understand what happened, looking around, only to find that the Scarecrow's hands were covered in blood. Suddenly the Scarecrow attacked his daughter. His wife then used an axe and cut off the Scarecrow's arm. John just woke up, and John knocked the Scarecrow to the ground, and then his son started the tractor to run over it. The family then left the barn and headed for the house. At the end of the story, a little girl gathers the remains of the Scarecrow in a sack and returns to the secret room in the barn. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, because by subscribing you have supported me to make better videos. What movie do you want next? Just comment below. Have a nice day.